The training yard of Valen Citadel smelled of ozone and crushed grass, and Princess Lyra Valen stood at its edge with her arms crossed, watching the newest batch of foreign recruits stumble through formation drills. Most of them were Corvette mercenaries, broad-shouldered and tusked, moving with the practiced arrogance of soldiers who had never lost a war on their own soil. Among them, almost invisible, stood a single human. Darien Voss was unremarkable by every metric the court cared about. He was shorter than the Corvette, slower in the obstacle sprints, and his sword form was, by the instructor's own assessment, functional, at best. Lyra had only noticed him because he was the only one who didn't flinch when the instructor screamed in his face. Apprentice, she had called him once, mostly as a joke between herself and her handmaiden. The name stuck. Even the instructors used it, half out of habit, half because nobody could be bothered to learn the names of every human shipped in from the refugee fleets. It didn't matter to Lyra. Humanity had arrived in the Valen Compact 3 years ago, fleeing some catastrophe on their homeworld that none of them liked to discuss, and they had proven to be exactly what the early reports suggested: physically unremarkable, technologically behind, and astonishingly stubborn. They took jobs nobody else wanted. They smiled too much. They asked too many questions. Darien Voss was simply the human-shaped wallpaper of her training yard, and she thought of him exactly as often as she thought about wallpaper. That changed on the night the Khazranoth came down from the mountains. The Khazranoth were not soldiers. They were not even, by any reasonable definition, sapient in the way the compact measured such things. They were apex predators, 6 meters at the shoulder, chitinous plating over corded muscle, claws that could open a transport hull like a tin can. For 10,000 years they had been the reason nobody settled the northern ranges. The compact's own bestiaries listed them with a single recommendation: avoid. They had never come this far south. Not in living memory. Not until the night the alarms screamed across Valen Citadel and 3 of them came tearing down the outer wall like it was made of paper. Lyra remembered the chaos in fragments. Guards scattering. Corvette mercenaries, the same ones who swaggered through drills, breaking formation and running, because no amount of training prepares a person for something that simply should not be fast enough to catch them and is anyway. She remembered being pulled toward the inner keep by her handmaiden, remembered the high keening shriek of a Khazranoth closing the distance behind them, remembered thinking, with strange clarity, this is how it ends, and nobody will even remember which one of these things killed me. Then something put itself between her and the shriek. It was Darien Voss. He had no weapon she recognized, just a length of pipe he'd apparently torn from a maintenance scaffold, and an expression that had nothing to do with fear. He didn't look brave, exactly. He looked annoyed, the way a man looks when something has interrupted his evening and he intends to make it regret the inconvenience. Go, he said, not even looking at her. I've got this. She did not go. She would tell herself later that it was tactical curiosity, the instinct of a princess trained to assess threats. The truth was she simply could not look away. The Khazranoth lunged. Darien didn't dodge so much as redirect, a small shift of weight, a guided fall, and the beast's own momentum carried it past him into the stone wall hard enough to crack the foundation. Before it could recover, he was already moving, the pipe coming down on the joint behind its foreleg with a precision that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with knowing exactly where a body, any body, was weakest. Lyra had seen compact soldiers fight Khazranoth before, in old training footage. They fought with spears, with energy lances, with squads of a dozen or more, and still the casualty reports were grim. Darien Voss fought one alone, with a pipe, and didn't die. He didn't kill it either, it broke off the engagement and fled, screaming, back toward the mountains, and that screaming was answered by 2 others who had been tearing through the eastern barracks. They didn't fight their way out. They simply stopped, oriented on the sound, and ran. Apex predators that had outlasted every army the compact ever sent against them turned and fled from a single human apprentice with a length of pipe. Lyra stood in the wreckage of the outer wall, breathing hard, staring at Darian as he straightened up and checked the pipe for damage like it was an inconvenience to replace. "What," she said, "was that?" "That was a Kazranoth," he said. "Big one. Probably scouting, not hunting. They don't usually come this far south unless something's pushing them." "That's not what I meant." She gestured at the empty space where 3 apex predators had been moments before. "You made 3 of them run." Darian rubbed the back of his neck, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost embarrassed. "Yeah. About that." It came out slowly, over the following days, in pieces that the court physicians and the Compact's military analysts assembled with increasing disbelief. Darian Voss was not, in fact, an unremarkable trainee who happened to get lucky. He had spent 6 years before the evacuation as part of a unit that humanity had built specifically to deal with creatures like the Kazranoth, except worse. Far worse. Things that hunted in the dark, that learned, that had been actively trying to wipe humanity from its own homeworld for longer than the Compact had known humans existed. "We didn't have your kind of tech," he explained to Lyra, sitting in the Citadel's medical wing with a bandage on his forearm that he insisted he didn't need. "No energy weapons, not at first. No armor that could stop something with claws like that. So we learned the things themselves instead. Where they were weak. How they thought. How to make them afraid of us instead of the other way around. And the Kazranoth recognized that. In you. Animals know fear when they smell it. And they know when something doesn't smell afraid back." He shrugged, the same shrug he'd given the obstacle course, the sword drills, every part of his training that he'd apparently been sandbagging the entire time. "I wasn't trying to hide it. Nobody asked. Figured it wasn't relevant if you weren't getting attacked by apex predators. You let an entire training cadre believe you were the worst recruit." "I was the worst recruit. At your drills." "Your drills are for fighting people, Your Highness. I've got 14 years of fighting things that don't qualify as people by any definition you'd recognize." He said it without bitterness, like a simple fact of inventory. Different toolbox. The Compact's military command did not take the news well, in the way that institutions never take well to discovering they had wildly miscategorized an asset. Within a month, Darian Voss was no longer the human apprentice. He had a title now, Beast Marshal, an honorific the Corvette mercenaries grumbled about, and then, after watching him walk unarmed into a containment pen to calm a captured Kazranoth juvenile, stopped grumbling about entirely. Requests came in from 3 other Compact territories asking for human consultants on predator defense. The refugee fleets, once treated as an awkward charity case to be managed and minimized, were suddenly the subject of very polite, very urgent diplomatic attention. Lyra found him in the training yard again, weeks later, this time teaching, not Compact drill forms, but something rawer, more patient, built around reading a creature's weight and intention rather than memorizing a sequence of strikes. The Corvette recruits who used to outpace him now followed his instructions like their lives depended on it, because, increasingly, they did. "You could have told someone," she said, watching him correct a recruit's stance with a small adjustment of the elbow. "From the start." "Could have," he agreed. "But you all had a system already. Categories. Rankings. I figured I'd let the categories catch up to reality instead of arguing with them." He glanced at her, and there was something dry and amused in it. "Besides, it's more useful information when the apex predators provide the demonstration instead of me." Lyra found, against every instinct her upbringing had given her, that she was smiling. "Apprentice," she said again, but this time, it didn't sound like a dismissal at all.